The last thing to talk about are what the common defenses are at trial that you'll tend to see in impaired driving cases, and there are a few of them. There's a whole industry. There are a lot of defense lawyers, criminal defense lawyers, whose only specialty is impaired driving because they know that that could be a fairly lucrative practice. So they specialize really in trying to get down to the nitty gritty. One that maybe has occurred to you in hearing about how people tend to get pulled over is through Section 8. Right? It is a search to get a breathalyzing sample out of a person. And if you can establish that the way that this search was conducted was contrary to the charter, that there weren't reasonable grounds given for why the person could be searched through getting a breathalyzer, then the evidence of that breathalyzer test is not going to be admissible, right? So the police can't just randomly pull you over. Well, I mean, there are provisions in place for establishing roadblocks and controlled stops, but they can't just decide, that guy's car, I think I'm just going to pull him over because I don't like him. If they're going to pull you over, there has to be a good enough reason for them to do that. Now, the privacy interest on the road, on the highway, is different from what it is for somebody walking on the street. That said, there are still some privacy interests. There is a reasonable expectation of privacy, and the police have to respect that. So, if you can establish that your charter rights were violated, then the evidence can't be admitted. If they're talking about evidence as to what they saw, how they saw you driving, right, just seeing a car moving around, that's not going to be something you have a privacy interest in. Everybody can see that, but the breathalyzer sample is something that they need to establish grounds for. If they do have legitimate reasons for getting a breathalyzer sample from you, and they get a breathalyzer sample, you can, and this is more difficult now than it used to be, but you can try and establish that the machine that was used wasn't properly calibrated at the time that the breathalyzer result was taken. These things, there are technicians who are responsible for making sure that that machine is actually accurate, and there's an amount of time between, like they have a regular maintenance schedule that they're supposed to keep to. If you can establish that they're not keeping to it, that maybe the machine was off by, 10 or 20 milligrams per liter, then a conviction for over 80 is going to be more difficult to get for the prosecution. You can also, and again, this is more difficult now than it used to be, you can, as a defense lawyer, try to establish that, well, even though it may be the case that the prosecution has been able to establish a quantity of alcohol you consumed, that you wouldn't necessarily be impaired. Now, keep in mind, this isn't really a defense for over 80, because if you're convicted of over 80, the prosecution doesn't have to establish that you were driving bad. They just need to establish that you were driving with a blood alcohol content over 80. They do need to establish there are reasonable grounds to get that breathalyzer result, but there can be ways to do this that don't necessarily mean showing that you were driving all over the road. However, let's say an important part of the evidence from the Crown is simply the quantity of alcohol that you consumed. And they're trying to get the judge to infer, well, this person drank, 4 liters of vodka before driving, so they were actually impaired. There is a way that you can try and establish through sophisticated biometric testing. They would put you in a simulator, have you run on a treadmill, try and establish that under the way that your metabolism works, you have a capacity to eliminate alcohol or absorb alcohol at a certain rate. That would mean that you were not impaired at the time. Again, this used to be more common. It's not as common anymore as a means of defense. Really, the old-fashioned, the best, most reliable way for a good lawyer to be able to dispute findings of evidence at trial is to be able to attack the credibility of the witness, right? If you can convince the judge that the police officer was sloppy in finding good grounds to be able to pull you over and good grounds to administer and request a breathalyzer sample, then you can bring reasonable doubt to the police officer's account of events, provided that their credibility is undermined. And that's going to be your most effective way of defending a trial.